Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our next session of the Classical Philosophy Reading Group after our little hiatus for the summer. It's nice to see so many of you here. It's really good to see some new faces here. Very welcome. Remember, whether you're coming to Plato for the very first time or whether you're a wizened old philosopher, everyone is welcome. No question is too obvious or too erudite. So, hello, everybody, and it's good to have you here. So, justice is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger, our theme for this evening. It's an age-old question. My name's Gareth Sturdy, in case you don't know, and I'm chairing tonight's event. But to help us answer that age-old question is indeed the age-old David Perks, retired head teacher, physicist, but most importantly for tonight, lover of wisdom. And Dave is just going to introduce us to why we're reading the Republic and why we're going to spend a little bit of time working through the Republic. And then we'll begin to discuss what hopefully we've all been able to read. So, David, welcome. Nice to have you here as well. And thank you for being the brains behind all of this. Please tell us why the Republic.
Well, I think there's a lot, an ending number of reasons why we could choose to read it. And if anyone was lucky enough to be with us at the Battle of Ideas Festival, have heard me mention a couple of mentions quite recently where Plato has come back again. And one of which was one of my favourites was an article in the Morning Star, which if any of you have ever come across, is not the kind of place you might expect to find classical philosophy, but they do read and they pick up on things. And the reason they noticed Plato was because of a book that had just been published by, I'm going to get his name, I'll get all names wrong, Walter Scheidel, I think is how it's pronounced. He's a German, but an academic at Harvard, and arguing that, classics as a discipline should be shut down and replaced by ancient history, a kind of joke, really, but he meant it. Of course, to the Morning Star, this was, the workers are getting their own back against the classicists, the elitists, which is not an unfamiliar kind of sort of theme culturally anyway. But it was a bit of a surprise to see it popping up there. So that's one way you could look at it. Why do people think that Plato is some kind of elitist, and that his attempt to define the ideal society, the ideal government, state, whatever you wish, is somehow basically in favour of those on the right of the spectrum, so we might say. So that's an issue that I really would like to look at, but indirectly, not directly. I'd like to look at it by saying, well, is that what he said? Or are we just making it up? And so I think there's an awful lot to do to unpick a crude representation of the Republic as a blueprint of some autocratic, authoritarian state, anti-democratic state. And I think we should take Plato at his word, in a sense, and do the work and think through what it means to actually try and imagine a state that could do the best it's possible to do for us, for all of us, the people. And so I think that and enough is enough in itself to warrant a bit of effort on our part. But you have to put it into a broader context. This has been around for 2,500 years and has been a successful commentary on the nature of government, the state, and more broadly on us as human beings and our capacity to create something worth living in. That there must be something in it. There's got to be something in it. And if it's philosophy you're interested in a slightly more purist version, the philosophical questions that Plato generates, because of his attempt to justify what it is that we should do to live a good life, haven't gone away. And some of them are very much still open questions. Others, you can argue, have been answered, but I would think that maybe that's a little bit optimistic. So, there's something in it for definite from all sorts of angles. And I think then just broadly, culturally, I said this in the email, a bit tongue-in-cheek, but references to Plato's ideas about the utopian society and or the other bits that go along with it are everywhere in our culture. Hopefully you'll pick a few out from today's discussion. There's a couple I really want to at least ring the bell for. Whatever, however you take them, they're there. So I think people used to say you should read the Bible because it's the book that's everywhere in literature. Well, this book is everywhere in philosophy and everything else. You can't avoid it, really. So hopefully you get a lot out of it. So what I want to do is start off a series of discussions, break the book down. I was going to do it originally in about 3 goes, but there's too much of it. So we'll break it down into about 40 odd pages worth in a session, and then see where we get to with it. And hopefully you enjoy it and get stuck in. And like Gareth says, asking questions is fundamental to this, and not being frightened to say the obvious, because it's not obvious, almost certainly. And we'll get something out of it. Okay.
Yeah, we really want people to sort of pitch in. Our argument is good, saying, hang on a minute, I'm not sure I follow that, or I'm not sure I agree with that, or can we just, what did you mean when you said whatever? It always works best when it's not just me and Dave having a conversation between the two of us that you're listening to, but you get very much get stuck in and take issue with things and argue it out in the way that Socrates might want. I was just going to say, Dave, before we sort of crack on, that if you've just read book 1 of the Republic, perhaps you might have read a little bit more, perhaps you've read the whole thing, but if you've just read book 1, then what this book is all about is Socrates' vision, as told to us by his student Plato, of, as Dave was saying, the perfect society, or the perfect state to live in. And some people read the Republic as Plato sort of giving Socrates' version of the perfect state and the perfect life, the perfect human being, like the state becomes a kind of metaphor for our own life, perhaps. Maybe that's not what Socrates meant, but that's how some people read it. But yeah, book 1 sort of clears the ground, doesn't it, Dave? It doesn't really start talking about, well, here's my idea of the perfect state. He sort of comes at this from a slightly oblique angle with these different people that pop up and just want to take issue with Socrates about one or two things. That's where it starts from, isn't it?
There's lots of ways of looking at it. I think it's not a bad thing to say, is that it opens the door on the necessity for, and I would say it was Plato really, rather than Socrates, to explain himself, which is very unusual in the dialogues that we've read up to now, that usually they're quite straightforward arguments between Socrates and another. And they end up with some kind of conclusion, which is usually not a conclusion. It's usually just confusion or ignorance or aporia, as the academics would call it, where you don't get an answer. But this one is not like that, okay? At least not once we get going. So in book one, I think it's very weird because I'm going to say maybe Socrates doesn't actually win the argument. He might actually be stuck in a corner, and we'll come see what you think, right? But I must say, at the beginning is very odd because the scene is set and we're off to Piraeus. Now, if you know your Greek mainland, you'll know that that's the harbour down below Athens, and it's quite a way. It's not as close as you think. It's a good old taxi ride. And so we're down there. And why are we down there? And this has taken me literally years to twig this. And I'll tell you now, it wasn't me that twigged it. I read someone else's sort of attempt to get it. And we're there to celebrate a new god in a festival. And, and there's lots of comings and goings and celebrations and whatnot. And you think, and then we bump into the protagonists of the first argument on the way back from the festival. But why? Why did Plato put him there? Because it seems a very odd thing to do. So this is me borrowing this idea from someone else. But, well, if you know Plato's whole attempt to defend his friend Socrates from the murderous Athenians who put him to death, one of the claims they made was that Socrates invented new gods and tried to convince the youth to go along with him. And this, as far as I'm concerned, is Plato just turning it right back on its head and saying, it's not Socrates that invents new gods, it's you lot. You invent them and then expect us to just accept them. So I think it's a retort to the charges laid against Socrates. That's my take on it. But anyone can throw anything in on that.
And if anyone does want to jump in at this point, feel free. I was just going to point out for those who may be new to all this, new to Socrates and Plato. In previous sessions, we've been looking at predominantly the trial of Socrates. So if you're not sure or not aware, the people of Athens, or the rulers of Athens, put Socrates on trial, ostensibly for misleading the youth. And essentially forced him to commit suicide. So he actually killed himself, but it was at the order of the Athenian authorities. And so there are several works that look at both his trial, the build up to his trial, the trial itself, the account he gives himself of himself in the trial, and then subsequently his death. And these are all the stages for an opportunity for Plato to sort of get into Socrates' ideas and why this man had such a profound effect on him. Sorry, I just thought I'd add a bit of context there. Does anyone want to particularly say something at this point? If you do, if you go to where it says react on mine, I think there's various ways depending on what version of Zoom you have, but you should be able to find a button that says raise hand. If you click on that if you want to say anything in the course of the discussion, and I'll try and bring you in at a suitable point. If you can't find how to do that, send a message on chat and one of us will pick that up and respond and let you know how to do it. Failing that, turn your camera on and wave at me and I will probably see you, but that's not the most advised method, nice as it is to be waved at. But yeah, if anyone wants to say anything at this junction, please make yourself known. I can't see any raised hands at this moment. So, David, on you go. Begin to unpack this for us.
Yeah. the next bit is a kind of odd little conversation between Socrates and one of I think it's the owner of the property. I'm going to read the name.
Cephalus.
Cephalus, yeah, I've got it. Right. So they're and they start having a conversation about being old, really, which I don't know if that affects any of you lot, but it made me think. So, and like, and this is it's sort of it's not really going anywhere much, all right? But you know, they go on, and then there's a bit in it which is a bit peculiar. Peculiar because I read it a couple of 2 or 3 years ago, and then I was watching a film, and I cannot remember the name of this film for the life of me. It's about a French girl in the war with a radio set, sending out messages to the British or whoever it is, and there's an SS guy trying to track her down because her dad had this massive jewels hidden somewhere or whatever. So it's in wartime France. And then there's this bit in it where this SS guy, who can basically do what the hell he likes because he's, he just is a law unto himself. And he meets this, I think, a prostitute, and she says, basically, I'll give myself to you if you let me go, whatever. And he says, oh no, don't need to worry about that, because the devils have gone, the mist's cleared, and I'm no longer under the control of those demons anymore, because he's got some medical problem or whatever. Here, according to Plato, his old age, according to this guy, it was some medical reason, and he'd lost his libido. And it's just me, maybe, but every now and again you read something and think, my God, that's where that was. And it's almost a dead ringer for it. Of course, you may disagree with me completely and say it's got nothing to do with it, but I think there are bits in here which are ping off in culture generally, which you just don't expect at all. And I think at least it makes you think about it. Anyway, this conversation doesn't go anywhere because the guy then wants to go off and celebrate some kind of festival and disappears. And then we get into a little bit more substantial, although not particularly well argued, I don't think. And this is where I would like to see what you guys think.
Okay, Dave, I'm just going to stop you for a minute though, because I don't think we clearly say what Cephalus's actual argument was. So do you mind if I just insert that and say it's kind of like justice is duty, right? It's all about justice, and he says you got to tell the truth, you got to honor your agreements and contracts with people, and that's what justice is. And as you say, that then sort of doesn't really develop. Sorry to cut in, but I think it's important to
You're
just touch that.
welcome. Right, because then he switches to Polymarchus, hopefully that's roughly right, who then tries to pick up the argument with Plato, and they're basically trying to follow it on and say, what do you actually mean by this, and what is it that morality is supposed to be? But I'm not sure that really gets going. And in fact, you might say that it's quite a weak argument. So I'd prefer to see if anybody wants to pick it up.
Yeah, I've got Martin has his hand up, and we've got Rachel as well. So I wonder if to ask a question, if you could, if it's possible for you to turn your camera on so we can see you, that'd be great. But
Sure.
I think Martin was the first one. Martin, go ahead. What would you like to ask?
Yeah, just a quickie in terms of I don't know, levels of argument really, because I think one of the things that's confusing me, because obviously I got from the old man, he'd sort of said he'd lived he was about to die and he'd lived a good life and he was happy and all that kind of stuff. Um, and there's a difficulty in terms of, on one level, they're arguing that justice is a matter of personal conduct. On the other hand, you very quickly get into this argument about what is just government. I mean, two don't seem to go together for me. One can be a completely unpolitical person and be just, but then they have a whole analysis. I don't at what point this switch is getting ahead. It just becomes a whole question about the 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 just state and the sort of people who should be ruler. So how do the two go together? Because it seems to be zero connection between the two, as far as I can tell.
Fantastic question, Martin. Thank you very much. That gets us off to a really great start. And Rachel, I'm going to take your point as well now. What would you like to say?
Yeah, it's kind of linked to what Martin said. I am not sure whether you're talking about legal justice, democratic justice, moral justice, or the whole kit and caboodle. If you could clarify that for me, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Two nice, easy questions, Dave, for you to get your teeth into. And now I understand why you wanted to skip over Cephalus and get on, because it does raise some interesting questions, actually. So over
Well,
to you.
see, the way I'm sort of looking at this is like it'd be better if instead of you getting me to answer it, you try and answer it. Because what I think Plato's doing, if you step back a bit, is saying, well, Socrates' answers aren't good enough, okay, and that you, the reader, have to do some work to make this make sense. And that's the general point about Plato's sort of writing anyway. But in this case, I think it's really apt because, as we'll see a bit later on, um, when the intervention of the sophist gets going, Socrates is stuck in a corner, basically, trying to fight his way out of it for quite a while. So, justice. I think the problem in trying to say what is justice is part of the problem that Socrates has with all of these ethical questions, is he finds it very difficult to pin them down. And that's his point, really, is, what is morality, what is justice, what is any of these issues we've come up with so far. He doesn't generally have an answer. So, and I don't think it's a kind of technical thing about which kind of justice. I think it's more trying to get to a principle that lies behind it, a kind of sort of abstract meaning that you can hang it on. And I think that's what he's generally after when we look at one of the dialogues, whichever one it is, which is going to force him into a corner. So you're right, in a sense. He's moving around and not really giving you a satisfactory response. And so I want to see if there's any more out there.
Yeah, I mean, please give us what you took from this. Don't think, well, that's just my reading, but it's probably wrong. You might be onto something. To sort of pick up Martin's point, where if I've got you correctly, Martin, you're sort of saying, well, when I was reading it, I was getting confused between personal conduct and then justice of the state. And I think, to echo Dave, I think that is the point, isn't it, David? Really, that Socrates isn't saying I mean this or I mean that. He's saying, I think, or rather trying to lead into a discussion of at what point does the conduct of individuals cross over into the conduct of a complete society, and do we mean the same thing when we're talking about the conduct of individuals and justice as a as a sort of concept that you might have in a court of law or something. So there's that, and there's also, of course, we need to just point out very clearly that Socrates in this dialogue says, well, I mean, I don't know what justice is. You know, he doesn't. So if you're coming to the Republic looking for a particular line, a little paragraph where Socrates comes up with a really eloquent definition of what justice is, that isn't really how these dialogues work, because it's more about trying to navigate around different ideas than just sort of telling you kind of what to think. It's more about how to think, I suppose, is a way to put it. Does anybody else want to pitch in with just how they understood this, or whether they got confused at that moment, or you know, if it's very clear to them, if they totally disagree with what David or I might be saying? Anybody else want to offer something at this point? Otherwise, it gets really awkward because we have this sort of big pause. Therese is coming in with a point. That's lovely.
Something I'm wondering about is the relationship between justice and morality, and thinking about both the sort of individual and or institution or state level. You know, does it work differently? So, for instance, if I act unjustly, if I don't pay my debt or something like that, that might be thought both unjust and immoral. But we don't, I mean, I think we attach injustice to organizations and states. We don't normally attach the label of immorality, but you know, perhaps we ought.
I think that's a really, really good point. It's something that I've been playing with whilst we've had these discussions, is the one thing that is missing in our world, our discussion, is a discussion of morality. It's, you know, it used to be, if you can remember back when I was a kid, morality was stuck near the church somewhere, and you kind of got something from that. That's vanished. I mean, the church is hopeless in this country as any more kind of moral lead. So where is morality, and where does it sit, is a good question in for us. And I think largely people look to themselves somewhat to try and understand it. But I think, you know, the actions we carry out, are they nominally good or not, can be applied to anything, anybody, any institution, the state, the police, anyone, right? So I think that it's, you know, Socrates is trying to get at, well, you know, is it a good person that does a good act comes into this? Is that what you want? And that comes maybe a bit later, but you know, in terms of this earlier discussion, is, you know, is the good part of something the fact that it does what it's supposed to do? Is it good because it functions? And I think that plays a part in this earlier discussion. So, like, you know, a knife can be used to chop down trees or cut bread or whatever, but that's not its real function. If you want to prune a tree, you use a pruning shears. I think so. Is that what makes it good? That it does the thing that it should do? And I think that's at least useful to play with a bit.
And it does lead fairly naturally into Polemarchus's argument, doesn't it? That, okay, well, maybe being good is just, you know, doing the things that you and your friends think are good. and conversely stopping or attacking the things that you think your enemies are doing, the bad things. I mean, so I like this way that the argument moves into that. It doesn't sort of flag it up and say, okay, so the answer to that is this argument here, the sort of more political argument, advance your friends and do down your enemies. But you can see how once you start thinking about the conduct of individuals, you end up just moving naturally towards, well, what about groups of individuals, collectives getting together and saying, this is how it should be, or stop those people from doing it how they think it should be. Chad, what's your point here?
Yeah, something that I felt like I was struggling with as we're going through these arguments is I felt like they're arguing particular points within the scope of, is this just or not? And we're not even yet looking for what is the scope of the idea of justice. And they're finding that, is this particular point maybe just or unjust? But it felt so much like we're not even getting resolution on one aspect, one instance of, is this an instance? Much less are we looking at the whole scope of what we're calling justice, much less are we looking at the whole scope of what we're calling morality. So I felt very stuck in like not even getting consensus within one point, and then we're jumping into discussions of justice and morality as a whole. And so it felt hard for me to kind of square that with what discussion was going on.
Yeah,
Dave, reading Plato's hard, isn't it? He never comes at things in the way you're expecting. Yeah.
Well, yeah, read it one year and then read it the next year, see what you think. Right, but I think you're right. The specific arguments or questions that are thrown up lead you into the difficulty rather than solving it. I think I can't remember. Forgive me, I cannot remember exactly where this one comes up, but it's the one with if you borrow something from your friend, should you give it back? And if that thing is as a sword, and your friend suddenly becomes a lunatic, is it right to give it back? Which, sounds a simple one, but I don't think it is. I think there's a lot in it, because obviously if your friend is a lunatic, that's quite easy to determine. But what if it's, well, I say that, it's easier. What if it's a political party? Should you give your support to a political party who you subsequently find out isn't actually doing what you would call a good thing? And that's very much now with us all looking at the future, not very far away. And you hear people constantly talking about, well, I'm going to vote for this person because they're not that person, because that must be the better thing to do. And I think you can then see that the simple example is not simple and cut off from everything else. It actually points to a more general problem. So I think that one about, should you give back the knife or the money or whatever it is to the person who's no longer what they said they were? Because that's when he says, well, what makes it good? What makes it good? Is it a good person? What is it? So, anyone else?
Yeah, Deborah's got a question. I'm going to come to you just a second, Deborah, but to pick up on that point from Chad more broadly, yeah, it's that experience of, are we looking at the thing head on? I think a lot of what Plato does is we is an attempt to try and define things, realizing that rarely can you look at them head on. Define justice. What do you mean by justice? Well, we're going to have to look in some, quite odd little places to see if we can tease out what it means. I think that's part of what Plato's all about. Deborah, what's your point? You may be muted, Deborah, if you want to unmute.
Yeah.
There we go. Lovely.
I think
Thank you.
I'm unmuted. I can't work out how to get my video on, I'm afraid. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
It was just on that point about would you return a knife to a friend that you borrowed it from if you knew that the friend had become insane and was likely to do harm with it? I thought that was so relevant to moral questions that come up today. And I think there's a link between the state and the person in certain cases. And it made me think of the Southport inquiry that has been going on. And when there was reference to the parents and why they didn't seek support or notify anyone about their son when they had concerns about him. And I thought it was, were they being moral? And I must admit, I looked at Wikipedia and AI on Plato's definition of morality, which was very helpful. And I wondered whether so I read about the three parts of the soul, and morality is the proper order of those parts. And I wondered whether in the case of those parents that they were not being moral because, I mean, emotionally, many of us would say, of course, they weren't being moral. But looking at it sort of objectively, the rational part seems to have not been leading the way for them. It would be more the emotional, the spirit part that was leading the way. And I found that it really helped me start to rationalize the Southport inquiry, that bit of the Southport inquiry. So bringing it back to David, your point at the beginning, the relevance of Plato, I just found it so relevant to something really current at the moment on the media. So, and that point in particular about the decisions you make, do I return that knife? Do I tell the police about my son? It's weighing up pros and cons and what's the best thing? What is the best thing for me, for my friend, for my son, for my family, for society? Anyway, that's it.
Great point, Deborah. Thank you for that. Martin, I'll come to you in a second. For those of you who aren't in the UK, in case you're not aware of the Southport story, you probably are, but it's essentially a young man with a knife went into a nursery in Southport and killed brutally a lot of children. And we've had a huge traumatic experience in this country about how did that happen? Were the parents wrong or right to not raise their concerns or what have you? So that was just the background to that incident. Martin, I'm going to come and take your question, and then Dave, perhaps you can address both points or what have you. Martin, what do you want to say? Muted, Martin. Sorry.
So just briefly on that. So I think one thing that it kind of reminded me. I've been reading a book about the Greeks a while ago, and I'm probably making an assumption about the motivations of parents here, but where basically there was a lot of effort in Athens to kind of try to, when they were kind of constituting a city state, to try to get people away from having their primary loyalty to their family and their primary loyalty to the state, if you like, through the democratical processes of the way they organize the hoplites and things like that. So I just wonder, with this question about family loyalty versus loyalty to the state does sort of implicitly come up with the question that the sophist raises, at least it's getting later, where at some point he kind of says immorality, somebody behaving immorally in a position of public office is kind of a good thing, in part because there's an assumption that family members or friends are going to benefit from him kind of plundering the treasury. So I was wondering how that plays into it, because there is an argument you could, in some cultural context, make a good argument for privileging your family members at the expense of everybody else, but that's presumably not the idea. That's certainly not what Plato would see as moral, and presumably even the sophist was saying that's kind of immoral, but that's just something that people would do.
Dave, do you want to take these questions on, or can I bring Therese in with her point?
Yeah, but if I forget, you have to remind me what the
Yep.
Yeah. So like
Sure.
Martin's thing, it's like one of the earliest dialogues we did was Euthyphro, which is another one I can't pronounce.
Euthyphro.
And that's where he meets Socrates on the way to court, and he's going to charge his own father with murder. And Socrates is making a point, well, are you sure you want to do that? So I think there's something about family and loyalty within family that is still there, and is not just completely dismissed by the Athenians at all. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not a simple question. Do you preference your loyalty to your family over your loyalty to the state, or the other way around? So, and which is because it's a difficult decision. It's not easy. So do you shop your son, who's obviously disturbed, or not? And then that's the Southport issue. Is not a completely straightforward question. It might look it from the outside because of what happened, but you can see that the decisions made inside that family are not easy. I think they were wrong, but that's my opinion. But they're not obvious. They're not as simple as that. Go on. You have to remind me, Gareth.
Well, I think you were addressing both points there, really. I mean, Martin looking at, is this an attempt for the state to kind of wean people off family loyalties and entrench their loyalty to the state? And I think it was Deborah's point about about how that might look in a terrible situation, a very real present situation like the Southport inquiry. I'm going to take Therese's point, because it is 7:15 already, and we haven't even got stuck into the Thrasymachus argument. So, Therese, if you could make your point, and we'll address that, and then we'll move swiftly on.
Unmute, please.
I'll try and complicate things as succinctly as possible.
Nice.
If one thinks that the parents of the Southport killer were immoral, I'm wondering if the circumstances were the same, except that the killing didn't happen, but the parents knew that he had the knife or whatever, would it still be immoral of them? Because there is, say, the potential for him doing something. And I think, I don't know whether the parents sought to get assistance for their son, and assistance was not forthcoming, would that affect the morality of their position? And going back to the original dialogue that we did, I seem to remember that there was it was quite contentious in the discussion at the time as to whether Euthyphro had done the right or the wrong thing in prosecuting his father, especially in the particular circumstances that, without going into all the details, that were a bit complicated. And the morality of it, I think, is based in what you value. And I think very often we think of values in black or white terms. And in order to have a sophisticated morality, I think we would need to have a hierarchy of values, or an ability to evaluate which values ought to dominate in a particular situation. And just to quickly round off with the erosion or enhancement of the strength of family bonds, looking around the world, regimes that seek to dilute the strength of family bonds often seem to be highly authoritarian, if not tyrannical ones.
All very good.
Some fantastic observations. Yeah, Dave, if you can respond fairly briefly, because I want us to move into Thrasymachus now.
I'm not going to. I'm going to do something else. All right. So the end of the Polemarchus section, I think, is really, really important for something else, because basically Socrates comes up with this idea that good people can't harm anyone, and I think that is huge, massive point. And if you understand the sort of more general approach to how do you deal with harm in a kind of ancient civilization context, you might say, and Christians did at first, say an eye for an eye. You hurt me, I'll hurt you back, and you try and balance it out so that you're doing the same kind of thing to them that they did to you. This this leads to disasters if you're not careful. It leads to an incessant feud which carries on, and there seems no end. And that kind of thing happened. There's no doubt that happened. But so Socrates is saying, no, you can't harm anyone. If you're a moral person, you just don't go there. That is so powerful a thing to say. And remember, this predates Christianity by a long way, right? And it puts you in a very particular situation. So now if you have a situation where someone's done something really horrible to you or your family or whatever, and you can't harm them, I'd really like you to think about that one, because it makes me think.
So there's a bit of a bombshell. So have I got this right, Dave? You're saying that essentially Plato or Socrates is anticipating Christ's sort of turn the other cheek, not an eye for an eye, the notion of forgiveness or what have you, is anticipating that by what, sort of maybe about 400 years or so.
Yeah,
that's what you're saying.
Definitely.
Wow.
So,
okay.
As a cynic, I could say the Christians nicked it from Plato, but there you go.
I don't know how much Plato Jesus read, but I mean, I don't know if anyone has got a comment on that. I'll keep going, but if you have, put your hand up, because that's stopped me in my tracks for a start. Look, I think what Plato does here is kind of realize that all of these things, all the things we're talking about, are coming together. But what if this and what if that, and what about the exception to this and so on? So rather than try and tackle all these things, as perhaps we're trying to do, he brings in this character Thrasymachus, who's the sophist. The sophist, if you're not aware, is a sort of a kind of person who purports to be very wise, but is going around Athens selling their knowledge. So they'll have an argument with you, but actually, what you have to do is pay them, and they will kind of give you the benefit of their wisdom. That's what the sophists are doing, and we've always understood Socrates as being the great enemy of the sophists. He speaks out against them and argues in a way that sort of tries to defeat their strategy, and really is very critical of people going around saying they know things and doing it for money. Socrates famously goes around saying he doesn't know anything, and yet, it was the wisest man in history, according to, according to his contemporaries and history. But look, Thrasymachus comes in and basically says might is right. He gets really angry and he says, stop all this kind of discussion that we're having. Don't be stupid. Whoever's got the power, whatever they say is right. And if that is to their own advantage or their family's advantage, well, that's fine. Have I got that? Have I got that basic sort of statement right, Dave?
Not bad, not bad. Yeah, I mean, so this is a real challenge to Socrates, because this guy is not going to play by Socrates' rules anymore. He's not going to play the game. So he's not going to do a tit for tat and let Socrates drive the direction of the conversation. He's going to let him at it, both barrels, and the point in the dialogue is where it's Socrates says he's scared, because what's going to happen next, and you can read that in lots of different ways. But I think the point is that what I'm going to say it wrong again.
Thrasymachus, everybody. Say after me, 1, 2, 3.
Does is say, well, basically, you, the moral, are the loser. I, the immoral, or the teacher of the immoral, because that's what he's basically saying he does, I'm teaching the winner, the one who's going to get the best life and going to get the most out of life. And that's his point. And that, that's a really fundamental challenge to Socrates, to say that, if you adopt your moral stance, you're just basically going to give everything to anybody who fights you. You're going to lose, and you're going to have a terrible life. And if you know what the life of Socrates is, it's not that of wealth and fortune and all the rest of it. And obviously he ends up being persecuted for just saying what he does. So, it's a substantive challenge to Socrates. And, how do you get out of that? All right. So it'd be good to even disregard the dialogue for a moment and just say, is it right that might is right?
What do you think, people? It's your chance to vote. They say in reality TV. I'm not going to actually hold a vote, but I mean, does anyone want to speak up in favour of the principle? We may not like it, but is it nevertheless a kind of iron rule of life that if you have the power, you get to set the rules? I'm sure one person is going to respond to us. Martin's in again. Martin, over to you, sir.
Just wanted to point out, someone in the chat just said that nice guys come last, which might I think it's Gareth. Yeah, oh it is Gareth. Yeah,
it is me. It is me. Yeah.
Okay, so I suppose if I was to steel man this, I mean, there's kind of back in the old days when you used to read, like, used to read people like Marx and people like that. there's kind of a sense in which the state kind of says that it rules neutrally for everybody, but it's really acting in the interest of the ruling elite. So I suppose people would say that the state has control of the means of education, the means of media, the means of and is very much able to set the political agenda, if you like. There are ways you can counteract that through the use of reason and so on, but that pretty much they hold the cards in terms of being able to market their particular view. So the argument would then be, how do you overcome that other than really kind of setting up a kind of a strong movement of your own, which can then gain support and very much gain power. But the question of truth in all of that gets lost, and it does become very difficult to get through the weeds of that, because once you've got power, you've got to keep power, and then you have to persuade everybody that your way is correct, and may not agree, so you may have to lie and say, actually, our position is abstract justice. I mean, that's my attempt at it.
That's really nice, Martin. Thank you. That's another great contribution there. And Nico, what's your point?
Well, I think my point might overlap with Martin's somewhat, but I mean, clearly in, say, modern British society, justice is not just enforced by might. The fact that we have the justice that we have is a function of might, of the, to put it crudely, the victory of the bourgeoisie over the aristocracy. So, in some senses, it is a function of might, and it is ultimately backed up by the state and the army and so on. On the other hand, the bourgeoisie couldn't arguably have come to power without championing, what should we say, a more just version of justice than the aristocracy or the monarchy championed, starting from the Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights and so on. So maybe you need a vision of justice in order to achieve the might that then allows you to impose that justice. That would be my crude attempt to answer the question.
Not crude at all, and it makes me think of the English Civil War and Hobbes, who if you're not familiar with the work of that particular philosopher, is trying to sort of deal with the situation in which England is torn apart by these kind of competing visions of who should govern and how they should govern. And I mean, David, I don't know if you would sort of agree with me on this point, but Hobbes seems to adopt this same sort of thing, that what's required is a strong ruler with a strong vision of what they want, that's got the power to sort of implement that. That's the solution. It's a sort of war of all against all, and life is a sort of brutal business. Just what Nico was saying there, that's kind of part of the process of clarifying what we mean by justice in a way through history. I'm going to hold you off before you respond to that. I might have been way off beam there, but Chad, I believe you're in the United States, Chad, so you might have a particular take on this from your context. What would you like to say?
I'm not sure about the United States as a whole, but what I'm struck by here is the confusion. The might makes right. At first glance, it seems to dispense with the whole pursuit of knowing what's right. If we can just simply say the mighty can, whatever they do is right. And there's a sense in which one can say can might result from right? Does being right result in power, which then is a kind of cycle of if you're doing right, you're gaining power and doing right. But that doesn't seem to be what he's saying. I mean, that's a point that you could argue. But the question is, well, if we're trying to get at what's right, and we know there's this phenomenon of someone with might can overpower whatever, then doesn't that just dispense with the whole question of what is the essence of right?
Gosh.
That's a really big one, because it makes me think of where we're at with this question now. You know, people have seen within this argument kind of as it goes through history, we end up with people like Nietzsche, we end up with people like Foucault, who basically seem to adopt that point, which is there is no idea of right. It's just power. There's no morality or whatever. There's just power. Dave, what's your take on all of this?
Oh, you are so depressing.
Well, that's part of my job.
I think there's a lot in all of it, and I think the alignment of what is seen as right with what is seen as the most powerful is undoubtedly there, but then the two things aren't static, they're interplaying with each other. And so we're redefining what we mean as right, just, moral through the development of a society where the power rests somewhere, has to. I think Martin said it. Politics is the struggle for power. That's all it is. And if you've got it, you've got to keep it. So that means you have to reinvent it constantly. You have to reinvent why you have power, which is a massive part of what it means to be politically in control and so on. So I think the truth is, I'm going to say it again, I can't say it. Say it for me. What is it?
Thrasymachus.
That's it. Right. Thrasymachus is onto something. He's onto something really important. And he's forcing a recognition that, you can say you're holier than thou as much as you like. It doesn't mean anyone's going to take any notice of you. So it's got to work itself out. And that, in essence, forces us into the next stage of the book. It forces us out of this dialogue on the basis of, fairly contained attempt to find the essence of what is justice within that conversation, to develop it. And the relationship between the individual and the state then starts to come out. And it's not one or the other, it's both. That's what Plato's getting at. But I'm not going to do that now. But I think there's a couple of bits to this discussion. So there's, is it enjoyable to be moral? Is that the best way to live your life? Which is the fundamental Socratic question. What is the best way to live your life? He can't answer it straight away. Socrates can't get there straight away. So instead, he's dealing with it in a sort of slightly askew way, and trying to undermine Thrasymachus's argument. And I think the point, at least one of the points that he points to is like, if you're saying immorality is the good, to be immoral is the right thing to do, is that successful? And he does it in two ways. He does it, is it possible to be immoral with other immoral people and succeed? And is it possible to be immoral with yourself and succeed? And that is a much stronger argument from Socrates in terms of undermining a fairly, I won't say simple, but a fairly rhetorical stance from the sophist, Thrasymachus. So, I undermining the ability to be immoral. If you say that's good, well then how are you going to do it? And I think that's got weight. That you can't dismiss what Socrates did with that one. It'd be nice to see what you think of that. Is it possible to live an immoral life?
So there you go. While you're getting your thoughts together on is it impossible to live an immoral life, a foreign life, an immoral life. Let's just sort of summarize the two bits of Plato's argument then, or Socrates' argument. The first is that actually what a ruler is more than just having power. It's being a craftsman, and a crafts person is always directed at the weaker of that sort of relationship. You know, it's all about improving something. It's improving the horse if you're a, you know, if you're training horses. It's improving your patient if you're a doctor. It's improving the crew and the ship if you're a captain. If you're a ruler, actually you're all about improving life for the ruled, and therefore rulers rule for the good of the people or the ruled, not for themselves. That's the first part of his argument. The second part of his argument is, and if you are believing in injustice, as Dave says, then you're going to lead to chaos and dysfunction. You're going to meet someone else who's equally immoral. It's just going to be a war of everyone against everyone. So those are the two strands of it. And Dave's not the only person throughout history to say, actually, is Thrasymachus right that a lot of this argument is a bit weak, is a bit slippery, is a bit rubbish? You know, that's Thrasymachus gets really angry because he's going, but you're not answering my point, which we've all been there. What do you all think? Is it a weak, slippery argument? It's a good one. Does it work for you? Are you about to tell us a better argument? What do you think? How long should I leave people stewing, Dave? I mean, we all realise that it's not that you're sitting there going, I'm not going to say anything. It's these things are hard. You know, you've got to sort of think stuff through. But please don't be nervous about, you know, putting a point forward, even if it's sort of half formed. If you think, well, I don't know what I think about the whole thing, but I do know I think this, or, you know, any part of this. Therese, delighted. I'm going to ask you to unmute. You have done. Lovely.
This is
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Therese. You are now unmuted. Please, you've got the floor.
okay. This is very presumptuous of me, but I'm wondering if, on the one hand, the value of Plato is that he's very thought-provoking, but if there might be a limitation purely, you know, inherently from the fact that he lived more than 2,000 years ago. So his ideas would have been derived from what he saw and learnt from his society and what he knew of the history up until that time. But we have seen so much more of individual human behavior and societal behavior. We know much more that, you know, to me, it seems naive to say, for instance, that a good person can do no harm or no bad. So, for instance, we all will be acting with incomplete information to a greater or lesser extent. And, you know, something that always resonates with me is the allegory of the cave. You know, we all inevitably live in a cave of incomplete information, perhaps some more determinedly than others, to shut out information that contradicts one's values and views. So with the information one has, one might be apparently doing a good thing, but with more information, it might turn out that is not the case. And, you know, one has to consider consequences, I think. So, for instance, to bring in something that is a concept subsequent to Plato, the trolley problem. You know, some choices are really invidious. So, you know, if, you know, one would default to thinking, you know, killing, murder is a bad thing. But if killing someone prevents someone from killing more people, innocent people, then even, you know, something that is sort of relatively simple compared to a lot of moral decisions isn't simple at all. Yeah, and just there have been some political situations where leaders seem to have made progress for their country or to kept peace and order in their country. And then once they're gone, things backslide. So just, you know, I was talking to a Turkish dentist recently who left Turkey because of how things are there now. And, you know, he was valorizing, for reasons I can very much understand, Kemal Ataturk. But look what has happened to Turkey since, or look what happened to Yugoslavia after the stability, relative stability under Tito.
Another marvelous point there, Therese. Dave, there's an awful lot in that. I mean, you know, at the center of Therese's point there is that Socrates was wise. Plato wrote his thoughts down, but does that mean he's wise for all time? Does that mean history has nothing to teach us? Do things change in the light of more information? I mean, that's you know, what do you have anything to say about that?
Well, all I would do is I'm not going to sort of answer that in a kind of straightforward way. Is to say that the point of what Plato's doing is to challenge you to think these things through, and I think you know, that remains and hasn't gone away. I mean, if we'd been able to answer all these problems, we wouldn't need to look at it, right? So if morality was a fairly straightforward thing to understand, there wouldn't be much to gain from this, but it's not. If anything, it's far more uncertain in the current period than it was. And I think you explained that quite well, Therese, because you said, you know, the society which is stable, morality is stable. The choices we're open to us are fairly clear. I can remember the Cold War. In the Cold War, there were goodies and baddies, and it was fairly clear which side was which if you accepted that. But once that breaks down, then all sorts of things are going on. And particularly at the moment now, where it's not clear there is a single global power, then what is it to make a choice becomes different, very different. So that's one way you can say it. There were a couple of things I was wanting to throw in or respond to.
I just want, before we lose to Therese's point completely there, I just wanted to say how lovely I thought it was. You know, I thought nothing really sums up these sessions more than when Therese said, you know, looking at the allegory of the cave. The allegory of the cave is something, if you're not sure, we will meet later in the Republic, and has become a kind of defining metaphor for so much thought. And I just love the way that Dave's saying, you know, there's no real answers to this. Therese is asking questions that are very, very central to this dialogue, and we're still turning back to Plato's allegory of the cave as a useful tool, perhaps, to think our way through, even if conclusions that Plato might have come to we wouldn't accept now, or would we? But whatever, you know, the allegory itself is a useful tool, and I think that's really the point of all this. Sorry, Dave, but you wanted to make a couple of other points.
Yeah, I'm not going on the cave yet. I'll leave that one. I think there was a point about leaders not wanting to lead that Socrates was making, is that, you know, one of the things about someone who's in power is they just don't want it, because it's not doing something for them. They're doing it for someone else. And he makes the point that, well, why would someone who's, you know, well-renowned, powerful or whatever, want to get into politics and take over the reins? And the way he expressed it was because they're looking at everybody else and saying they're useless, they can't do it, so I've got to do it. And I think that's another way of looking at you know, what it is that we mean by somebody, you know, expressing power, but it isn't as simplistic as maybe, you know, the powerful person just takes over. Do they really want to? A simple little example, Elon Musk comes to mind. I think he's let go of the power or the reins of power now quite clearly after his experience of working with Donald. It's not as simple as you might think to explain, you know, the mighty just take over and that's the end of it. And the other thing, which will come back, and again, I'm not going to overdo it now, but I think it's been referenced a couple of times, is definitely out there in the world at the moment, is the idea of the noble lie. You know, that we tell a lie to try and achieve something that we think is good, and we get people to accept it, because we think that the outcome that we get from that is better than not doing it. And that is a big one, and that comes in later on. But it's you must be aware of that, I'm sure. Where does that leave us? I think, Gareth, we're on the way to winding this one up.
Yeah, we're definitely on the home straight, as it were. I just want to bring in a little point that Jeffrey, I think, Jeffrey makes in the chat. Again, he's responding to Razor's point and saying, did Plato really live in a gentler age? The Peloponnesian Wars, Sparta. You know, Plato was very influenced by the Spartans, as we will see later in the Republic. You know, they had a pretty, let's call it, hard line view of how to bring up children, and part of that was take them away from their parents and see which ones could fight. And you know, we see echoes of these kind of things in the Republic. So anyway, Jeffrey's point is atrocities very close to home. Plato may have seen more dead and mutilated bodies, or Socrates, than any of us have. You know, so it's an interesting reflection on whether he may have known more about some of these harsher, more brutal realities of life than perhaps we do. Don't know. And then Martin's chipping in and responding to that and saying that he doesn't think he did live in a gentler age, but he couldn't have anticipated some things. And you know, the extent of tyranny in the 20th century, totalitarianism and so on, Stalinism, the Nazis and what have you, you know, could Plato have even conceived of that level of sort of depravity? Yes, we have about 10 minutes left. I just want to check that you know, everybody's on board and feeling that they've got their questions answered. Has anybody out there got anything that they want to ask about either, you know, Plato, Socrates more generally, or specifically about book one? You know, if there's something on your mind there that you think, oh, I can't ask, it's just too darn obvious, you know, when did Socrates live or something, you know, ask it, you know, let's find out the things that you want to know, that you might have questions about. Instantly, some hands have gone up. Excellent. Mike, I'm going to unmute you, Mike, if you can make sure we can hear you.
I've now unmuted. I've now unmuted myself, haven't I? Yes. Well, I think there was something going on there that suggested, some people were suggesting that perhaps justice wasn't quite timeless, that we could take a different view of justice as time passed. But all that time will do is produce more knowledge. that if we're not talking about something, justice being timeless and applying more examples to it, then we're not quite getting the notion, we're not talking about the right kind of thing. I think that the confusion might well be that not that we acquire more knowledge and understand justice better, but that we require more people to talk about it and therefore get more disparity.
That's a lovely point and very succinctly made, Mike. Thank you very much for that. And if I could encourage people to make their points sort of briefly and succinctly, that would be really good. Nico, on to you.
Okay, so I've not read much of the Republic yet, but obviously the first part is in the form of a dialogue, which is not entirely surprising given that Socrates is involved. But I'm interested in why the dialogue argument form, it's almost like a epistemic novel, i.e. a novel written in letters. Obviously a very unusual form today. So what was the origin of that? Is it because in Greece it was the era in which writing was invented and maybe speech was influencing the nature of writing, or is it because Socrates loved dialogue and asking questions and so on, or something else?
Fantastic question. I hope you're getting ready for these, Dave. Martin's got a question as well. Martin? You're muted at the moment, Martin.
Just so we don't finish without discussing what, the way he tried to answer the question, because I got the impression he was trying to argue that almost like justice of a just ruler's kind of a kind of expertise, and kind of he has that like analogy with the physicians and the and the eye doctor and whatever being doing it for the good of their patients, which wasn't terribly persuasive, but nonetheless he was trying to say that that the ruler, it's a kind of a state craft kind of, and therefore you needed the right sort of person to do it. So the person who wanted it, I think you mentioned that point, Dave, about the person who doesn't want it, because the person who does want it will want to gain avarice. But then it kind of loses it a bit, because he kind of talks about a house being kind of divided against itself, company of thieves being, they'd all stab each other in the back if they were all perfectly immoral and so on. So where does he get this idea of perfect morality from? And again, I did notice the similarities to the New Testament. Jesus says a house is not divided against itself cannot stand. It's the same. At least with an eye for an eye, you could see that there was like an idea there that when the Torah was written, it was tribal justice before then. So the idea of justice being proportionate did work as a theory of justice. The perfect idea of justice cannot work unless it seems to be you're trying to get the right person to do it, but does that person really exist?
Okay.
That's to be all over the place, but
No. I've got it down. Fantastic 3 questions. Any more very briefly before I hand over to Dave to tackle some, all, or none of those? Therese, nice and brief if you can, Therese. Thank you.
Very briefly, I didn't mean to imply that Plato lived in a gentler age, or Socrates by any means. But also, that, as Martin suggested, there's so much he couldn't have anticipated. Could he have anticipated, for instance, that people have lived in an era when God or gods are thought to be dead or non-existent?
Dave, I don't envy you. Why dialogue? Justice is not timeless, or is it? The way he answered the question, and where is the idea of perfect morality coming from? Lots of things there. Tackle what you can.
Okay. Why dialogue's a great question. We try and sort of answer it by reading them, basically. But I don't think you'll find a very simple explanation for why. But I think one way around it is that Socrates refused to write anything down. And so all he left us was his conversations. So Plato's basically given us those conversations, which is a useful device for him, a literary device, which allows him to write some amazing stuff and explore ideas he wants to explore. So, how he came to think that this is what he was going to do is beyond me. It's like that is a work of genius, coming up with this approach. Some people don't like it. There's a friend of mine who says that, the one thing about the dialogue is I can't stand dialogue. It's like, well, tough, hard luck, but I think to me, it reflects the kind of dialectic approach he has, which is a particular attempt to explore ideas really well, and it works. And then again, the Republic breaks that down and doesn't do it like that, as we'll see as we go on. So it stands out as a different kind of work. So it started like a dialogue, but it's not going to end like that. So that's that. And then just on a gentler age, are you kidding? Right, the Athenians were in a war with the Spartans, which ended, I think it was, I'm going to get the date wrong, but whatever it was, 404 BC or whatever. And they came within a whisker of being exterminated. And the Spartans relented and let them live. Why? Because they helped defeat the Persians. So, being exterminated was a quite a normal result of losing a war. So I think they had quite a lot of reasons to think things through in terms of, what way do we go? And almost all of them, if they were fit and wealthy enough, fought, all of them. So there was, again, a different sense of who you are as a citizen and so forth. So morality, it kind of impinged quite harshly on them. So I think they had, and the amazing thing is that they found the space to think about it and to develop ideas about it rather than just go to war and kill each other. That is the amazing thing about the Athenians that stands with us today. So that's one way of looking at it. And then what else is it? Oh gosh, I'm forgetting.
Well, there was where did this idea of perfect morality kind of come from? But to be honest, we have 2 minutes to wind up very quickly.
Martin was playing with this a bit, and I think the way he finished it is actually exactly what Plato does in the rest of the book, is to play this out. I can't remember exactly what I was going to, I'll give up. I can't remember what I was going to say, but there's a couple of really good bits in what Martin put forward, and I am sure that they will come back again in the future sessions. Oh, just finally, this argument, what you want to have in your head is, did Socrates win the argument? I forgot that this is where we should put it, because he ends it by saying that the point is that the mind has to be in a good state for you to live a good life, in effect. And it's a kind of psychological explanation at the end. It's nothing to do with the state. It's a psychological explanation. And I think that's really, really important in where we're going. All right, I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Dave. I mean, yeah, it leaves us hanging for the next bit. As I say, he kind of clears out a load of ideas he doesn't agree with, but he doesn't really tell us what justice is, and then we have to read on and find out what his next set of ideas are. Thank you, everybody, for this. I hope that you've got as much out of that as certainly I have. Fantastic discussion, great points being raised. And it's worth saying that Dave will send out an email after this, which he'll put some more reflection in, having thought a little bit more about what people say, points he might have wanted to make and hadn't had an opportunity to, or what have you. Do engage with that. Do come back to us. Keep the conversation going. Dave, do you have a date yet for the next session, or do we need to notify people by email?
I think I'll send out an email, because I haven't quite worked it out, because it's knocking on the door of Christmas or afterwards. I'll preferably think after Christmas, if that makes sense to people. But I shall put something out probably the middle of January.
Can we just give Dave a thank you for inspiring us to do this, and then for answering all our questions tonight? Let's just give Dave a bit of a thank. You don't have to unmute yourself, but you can do it digitally if you like. Stay in touch with us, people. If for any reason you're not on the mailing list, make sure that you get on to the mailing list. I think everybody here actually is, so I think everyone has the list, has the address. Okay, everyone, thanks very much. If you are in America or elsewhere in the world, it must be very late for you, I think. So thank you very much for staying up or getting up early. Don't quite know where everybody is. We'll see you again after Christmas. Again, thanks everyone. See you soon.